part of the show that we call the random sample. We're already way off the tracks. However, John and I each picked 3 stories that happened either around the USA or around the globe, which are LGBT focused. So, John, you want to start us off?
Well, we were talking about the Olympics, so this is a perfect kickoff for my first story, and it's about something called the Pride House. So Pride House is an international organization, a Scottish charity that was formed as an LGBT coalition of sports and human rights groups, and they will have a house or like an event space at the Olympics, usually off property, they say. But this is one of the first years where the Pride House was being hosted on the official grounds of the Olympics, and it's being hosted by none other than Canada.
Oh, is Justin there?
It's not the only Pride House in South Korea, but it's the first in the world to be embraced by a National Olympic Committee alongside poutine. Is that cheese in the... Along poutine and beer, Canada Olympic House offers a message of inclusion and gender diversity by hosting a space for LGBTQ fans, athletes, and friends. The idea for this Pride House, organized in collaboration with South Korean activists, is based on the tradition of Olympic delegations opening hospitality houses to showcase their home nation's culture and history and welcome fans. Rather than focusing on a particular nationality or team, the Pride House welcomes all.
Of course, pride in Koreans, translate to happy. Happy house.
Happy house, yeah.
We've got a happy house.
Well, the
the
article snaked and went into the weeds on how they're not that big on gay marriage and they're not the most. But
South Koreans?
Yeah, and I just thought, well, we're talking about the thing. As for Team Canada, they are saying very clearly we support this mission. Canada's Hospitality House, created out of a gate ball clubhouse. Now, gate ball is similar to cricket. So I guess the ball sits on those two things. Has a ski lodge vibe. It offers lounge chairs, fire pits, and table hockey games. So I like that idea. When we visited, a capacity crowd had gathered in a public area inside to watch Team Canada play and defeat the U.S. women's hockey team.
Yeah.
Until now, every Pride House has been held outside of the official bubble that surrounds mammoth events such as the Olympics, World Cups, and other events. But this time, Team Canada offered to host it within its Canada House in Gwangyong, site of the flat ice events at the Pyeongchang Games. Hey, bro. So that was my first one, and that's for you, that last one. Hans Prick.
Oh, no, you're busting my bars. You got to watch Team America. Go get it at deep discount.
We want to announce that's going to be an official movie. That's going to be one of the official canon movies of the focus group. And I think what we should do is if you buy, well, we'll do that later. Yeah. We have a whole plan about we think Team America. You pop that in now. What is it, 10 years old, right? 2009?
Just change Il to Un.
Just change Kim Jong-il to Kim Jong-un. You're done, right? Yeah.
Mine, so my first story, the headline is Army Secretary, soldiers unconcerned about transgender military service. So the new, and there's his pictures on here if you're following along, that's the new secretary of the Army named Mark Esper. So he's been traveling around to Afghanistan, to parts of Europe, to other bases, South Korea, and has been talking to the troops about the impending ban that Trump has announced for not having transgender people serve in the military. And it's supposed to come into effect actually today. The Pentagon is supposed to submit to President Trump their recommendation as to what they believe about transgender service, and according to his directive, which he made last August, banning transgender people from serving. And they're not sure, they said they're not sure what Trump will do, but so the Secretary of the Army went on this listening tour, and it was interesting what he found. So the decision's supposed to go into effect whatever happens, whether he does the ban or not. It's supposed to be made by March 23rd. So Mark Esper says, you know what, he said, I went around to all the bases and talked to everybody, and the only real concern our troops have right now is food quality and pay.
Food quality and pay.
Hey, he said they've asked him all kinds of questions about serving with troops that had male-female, and he said he talked to 6 or 7 different transgender service people. They said that there's some estimation that there's 15,000 transgender people serving. Some say it could be between 1,300 and 6,000. Either way, they said that they're serving. And the other thing that people said they're more concerned with is we just want to make sure that everybody wants to be treated with a clear set of standards. He said at the end of the day, the Army is about standards. It's a standards-based organization. Make sure everybody has the same opportunity, everybody's treated fairly, and everybody is graded on the same standard. But if you're asking us about issues we have, it's food quality and pay. It's not about transgender people who have volunteered to serve their country. And they said what it really boils down to is they said the Trump administration, and I'll add my own Maxine Waters reference, and the scumbag cronies have created this wedge issue where there wasn't one or there isn't one. And they said it proves that this trans ban is wrong. It's wrong on politics, wrong on policy, wrong on principle. It's bigoted and puts political expediency before respect for those who want to serve. So it's interesting. They said the other guy who was supposed to come in to be the that started this ban, also started the ban in Tennessee, he ended up pulling his nomination out to be Secretary of the Army, but he's now running for Congress in Tennessee.
All right.
What's your number two?
Number two, GOP lawmakers introduce bill to call same-sex marriage parody marriage. Now, this is in South Carolina. The bill received its first reading in the South Carolina State House about a week ago, and it's entitled the Marriage and Constitution Restoration Act, and it seeks to amend South Carolina law to include new definitions around marriage. In short, it will define certain terms, including parody marriage and marriage, to provide that parody marriage policies are non-secular in nature, to prohibit the state from respecting, endorsing, or recognizing any parody marriage policy or policies that treat sexual orientation as a suspect class, and for other purposes, basically, a same-sex marriage is now the law of the land. It wants to create a two-tier system. So they're trying to redefine the word so that there's a parody of marriage and then there's the religious version of marriages.
Well, are these
These are three of the Gang of Six, they're called. I didn't even bother taking their names
dandies,
down because,
aren't they?
well,
dandies.
You know, I look at these faces and I'm like, you have nothing better to do with your time than to worry about calling marriage a parody or not. Like, there's...
But the pro-gun.
Oh. So it says marriage between a man and a woman is natural, neutral, and non-controversial. Well, I think that a 50% divorce rate means it's not exactly non-controversial. I mean, you know, okay... the bill notes that civilization for millennia, in the bill for millennia, have defined marriage as a union between a man and a woman. Marriage between a man and a woman arose out of the nature of things. This is what they write. Out of the nature of things. And marriage between a man and a woman is natural, neutral, and non-controversial, unlike parody forms of nature, right? It goes on to claim the following about the Obergefell, I never pronounced it. Obergefell and Hodges case, which is what the Supreme Court decided gay marriage on. So these guys, the three of them say, or the six of them actually, but I showed three, there has not been a land rush on gay marriage. So they're acknowledging that the doors are not being stormed down by people trying to get married, but there has been a land rush on the persecution of non-observers by secular humanists and an effort by secular humanists to infiltrate and indoctrinate minors in public schools to their religious worldview, which is questionably moral, plausible, obscene, and is not secular. And it's unsettled whether or not sexual orientation is immutable or genetic and is therefore a matter of faith. Here we go again, folks, with the intersection of things that are not supposed to be intersecting in our culture, right? Church and state.
I bet
go into that little building and believe and say what you want to say, but the minute it comes to the town square, now it's not so.
I bet you $100 they're anti-woman's right to choose, they're pro-gun, they're pro-restriction for voter rights.
Yeah.
But want nothing to do with...
I should have done research on that for these guys.
You don't have to. And they want nothing to do with gun control or restricting people to get these military-style weapons. I mean, it's disgusting. They're scumbags.
The community, the LGBT community, was like, okay, you know, don't you? And they said this hateful, discriminatory bill. Don't you? And the woman from down there and this guy were like, don't you have anything better to do with your time? Aren't there people that need your help, or whatever? So that was my second one. What's on your second list there?
Well, I'm not a fan of either of the paintings that the
Obama, the new official portraits, yeah.
But there's some controversy within the gay community about the about the painter Kehinde Wiley, who painted President Barack Obama. It's the picture of him, and if you're watching him in the leaves, in the trees. And each one of the flowers, I didn't realize this, they all symbolize something. And one of them symbolizes flowers from where he was raised in Hawaii. One's an African violet, and one is I believe, a chrysanthemum. So he talked about the symbolism, the chrysanthemum, which is the official flower of Chicago, and the African lily, which represents Africa, and the jasmine of Hawaii. So I thought, well, that was kind of cool. But this artist, he's from New York. His name is Kehinde Wiley. And so him and the woman, Amy Sherrod, who painted Michelle Obama, they made a big deal when they did the unveiling that they were the first two African-American artists ever to paint presidential portraits.
Yeah.
There's apparently 1,600 of these portraits hanging around in the gallery there. I didn't realize that. I thought it was just one, but they said there's a bunch of portraits of different presidents. And what's happened is the gay community has gotten a little upset because they said the fact that they made a big deal about announcing that that they were the first African-American artists, but in the case of Kehinde, they didn't announce that he was gay.
This is news to me. I mean, I might have guessed it from the suit. It's a little flamboyant.
And so the critique was, they said George M. Johnson, who's writing for Gyro or Grio, G-R-I-O, says that Wiley's sexuality is an important part of this portrait story. News coverage on Monday's unveiling noted that he was the first black artist to paint a presidential portrait, but it erases his queer identity. Although many see this as a small part or some gay agenda, it is neither. Black queer people have been historically faced with an erasure of their identity in order to be accepted in black spaces and spaces at large. He said his sexuality is an important part of the narrative as much as his being black is. And I was curious about that. Do you think that should have been part of the story? They said
at first blush, I'm going to say no, because it was about Michelle and Barack Obama. It's their official portrait unveiling. I think knowing that about the artist is cool and its backstory, but I'm not sure that had to be front and center because it's about them. And
I was thinking about that if there was someone who sang the national anthem at an inauguration, and whether the singer was black, white, or whatever, would you say, oh, it's the first time a female sang? I don't know. I was trying to, people were kind of on the fence by it. I didn't know what I thought about it. Is it, if you're an African-American who's black who always feels they were marginalized and you want visibility, yes, I could understand that. But I didn't know if this was the place for them to, not only is he the first African-American to paint, but the first gay African-American to paint a portrait.
No one was there. They weren't hiding it.
They weren't hiding it, but they said that it was, for people who knew him and knew his work, that it was an obvious
slight
kind of whitewashing.
Interesting.
No pun intended.
Okay.
Anyway, I thought that was interesting because I had no idea.
I had no idea either. And
not that I even thought about it, to be honest with you.
No, you were fixated more on the final product.
Not the work.
On what the portrait looked like, yeah.
What your third story?
All right, my third story, my last story for Random Sample, actually circles back in a weird way to what you were talking about in your story with the Secretary of the Army traveling amongst the bases and finding out what the service members were top of their heap. So the Trump administration wants to keep secret the details of how it reached the decision to reinstate the ban on military service by transgender people, and that happened last July when he did the tweet. Justice Department lawyer argued this week. So just to recap this, there are about 3 or 4 lawsuits against the transgender ban that will, in fact, impede it from going into effect. They all have to be cleared out before it happens. And in one of the cases brought by BuzzFeed, I think it's BuzzFeed is one of the defendants, the Justice Department lawyer argued this week in one of the lawsuits challenging the ban that executive privilege means the administration doesn't have to turn over the information about how they reached a decision. But U.S. District Judge Colleen Kohler-Cotelli, who is hearing the suit, says that privilege isn't absolute. The Justice Department doesn't want to reveal certain information regarding meetings or conversations the president had before his tweet last July announcing reinstatement of the ban. Donald Trump tweeted that he'd reached the decision after consultation with my generals and other military experts. So the minute he said that, they became, when he says, I reached this decision with these people, they became part of the process.
Generals.
Yeah, my general. Yeah, thank you. You're right. My generals. We were talking about him at lunch, the king, right? So the judge has had multiple calls with the different attorneys, and the Justice Department refuses to budge on this. And her take is that executive privilege may or may not be in play here, but she needs to have all the facts about how he arrived at this before she could let this case go forward. And so it's all stalled out. The Justice Department lawyers are stonewalling. They refuse to give her the information. She's now doing multiple conference calls. I didn't know that judges do that. They'll actually not have a court hearing, but they'll do a hearing by phone or like a conference call, yeah. And on the last one, she said to them, you're not making this any easier, and you really do need to provide these documents. Even if no one else sees them but me, I need to be able to know how this decision was arrived at. So long story short, with multiple courts in the federal system hearing multiple cases, it's highly unlikely that even if Trump decides, or if the Pentagon said, okay, you can do this, that they can do it, because there's going to be all these legal challenges against it. Again, a phenomenal waste of time and resources.
Money, resources, energy, bigoted, racist,
yep,
blah, blah, blah.
Waste of time.
My third one kind of circles back to whether this artist should have been identified as gay or not,
Really?
I guess. So the headline is a bill for school curriculum. A bill is introduced for school curriculum including LGBTQ history. And this came from the Windy City Times in Chicago. And there's a group of educators that want to put, it's called the Inclusive Curriculum Bill, SB 3249. And essentially, it's a bill to the Illinois school system. Illinois prides itself on being the most progressive of the Midwest states. And they said that they've, over the years, they've had inclusive history that benefited African American history, marginalized groups, people with disabilities, women. And they think they want to add, or not they think, they want to add LGBTQ history into the fold of what kids learn. And they said they thought, when they've looked at a number of studies, that when you do actually expose people, and they said whether you're an LGBTQ person and you see yourself in some of the history, and or you're non, and then you find out one of your classmates or peers might be LGBT, that it helps create the gap. They said between 75% acceptance where they have schools where they do teach it versus under 40% at schools where they don't teach it, and kids end up being bullied and don't have good outcomes. It's interesting because Michelangelo Signorelli had talked about this before as kind of the next horizon for us, I guess, in terms of the civil rights movement for LGBT people, of saying we need to get it into the classroom a little bit. Obviously, it's going to be fraught with all kinds of issues. They said they know it's not going to be easy to get through. And they gave a couple of examples of people that they thought, for instance, if you knew were LGBT, they said the nation's first gay rights organization, the Society for Human Rights, was formed in 1924 in Chicago by somebody from Illinois named Jane Addams. They said also that the organizer of the 1963 March on Washington was a civil rights activist, Bayard Rustin, who his picture was up there early. Sally Ride, the first U.S. woman in space, was a lesbian. And then I picked one because in Philadelphia this goes on all the time. Friedrich Wilhelm August Heinrich Ferdinand Steuben, or otherwise known as Baron von Steuben. Now, he was George Washington's chief. He really was credited with developing our army and developing all the strategy and everything against the British. And it says George Washington brought him over because homosexuality was criminalized at the time in Europe. And he knew that he had these relationships based on correspondence that they had, and that he wanted von Steuben to come over. And apparently von Steuben came over to the United States, brought his 17-year-old secretary, Peter Stephen DuPont Show, rumored to be his lover. At Valley Forge, he also had a close relationship with Benjamin Walker and William North, both military officers in their 20s. Now, I Googled these guys. They're real dandies when you go look at them, if you were going to do gay face or not. And assumed to have been romantic with them, and it said because homosexuality was criminalized, he adopted them. as his heirs, and also brought in another one, John Mulligan, who was also considered one of his sons and inherited his vast library collection of maps and cash. I thought they should have changed his name to von Steuben instead of
Von Steuben.
von Steuben. But so they're trying to include
Positive representation.
positive representations of LGBT people. My only thought on that whole thing was, I remember in elementary school and high school, we never got past the Civil War, really. I mean, when you think about a school year when you were studying history, how far did you get?
Well, we got all the World War I, World War II.
Not really. It was all brushed over. You spent a lot of time in the Revolutionary War, a lot of times the colonies, slavery.
You're talking about like middle school or...
You never got too far. All of a sudden it was, May was coming, it was too nice, you wanted to be outside, and you were touching on Vietnam a little bit, and then you moved on. So I was trying to figure out if you're going to add, I'm going to add women, I'm going to add people with disabilities, I'm going to add marginalized groups, I'm going to add LGBT. You know how long it's going to be? You could spend a whole week on von Steuben.
Well, apparently, and the dandies that
Then who are you going to, you're going to cut out Ben Franklin? You're going to cut out, Benedict? Or what are you going to do?
Did you chop down that cherry tree? Yeah. Well,
Does it matter that Sally Ride was a lesbian?
She was, no. I don't think it should matter, but it's interesting to know. And yeah, it's good to know. Yeah.
So beyond just saying she was a lesbian, do you think you need to teach it? I guess that's the question. So it's going to be Illinois. It's going to be fraught with.
Yeah, but I think the thought process behind it is a noble one, because just the statistic alone of knowing that, if it reduces
bullying and
increases tolerance, then I think it's probably smart.
You're right, John. You always make it nice.
You're right, John. You always make it nice.
I don't.